For years, this man turned cozy homes and crowded streets into scenes of bloody tragedies. He was not seen, not heard, not recognized. He was like a shadow that came without warning and left behind only death. The victims could not resist. The police tried unsuccessfully to find even a hint of a clue, and the city was gradually consumed by panic. He was called the London Rapist Killer, and this name became synonymous with horror. 1980s, London. A city of contrasts, where majestic cathedrals coexisted with dark alleys, and narrow streets became labyrinths for those who were in a hurry to get home from work. Here, amid the glitter of neon lights and the noise of evening pubs, an evil that had remained elusive for years awoke. It was not just another thief or a brazen crook. This was a true hunter who acted without fear or pity, skillfully avoiding any trace. At first, his crimes seemed to be isolated incidents. A woman was found in her own home, with no obvious signs of a struggle or break-in. A few months later, another victim was found on the other side of town. For a long time, the police rejected the possibility of a serial killer. No connection between the victims, different ages, professions, social status. He seemed to have chosen at random, but acted with mathematical precision. The newspapers dubbed him the London Rapist Killer, and the name quickly became known in every home. People were afraid to go out on the streets, tightened security in their homes, and avoided meeting strangers. Even those who had always considered themselves brave began to look over their shoulders and lock themselves in their homes, checking the locks several times. But fear could not stop this monster. The police stepped up patrols and received hundreds of calls reporting suspicious persons. But it didn't change anything. He remained elusive, skillfully avoiding traps. His murders became even more mysterious, and each new crime only added to the questions. The only trace was a scanty DNA sample, which at the time could not give investigators anything. And then, suddenly, everything stopped. The city seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, but at the same time, people's hearts remained in doubt. What had made it stop? And most importantly, was it true that it would never return? It was only in the 2000s, when modern technology reached a new level, that one ordinary arrest for petty theft became the key to solving a case that had kept London in fear for years. And now, get ready, because we will tell you the whole story of how the monster who was one step ahead of the police suddenly fell into their hands. London, 1983. The first victim is a young student who rented an apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Her friend found the body after the victim failed to show up for a scheduled meeting. The crime scene was so clean that police initially suspected suicide, but the nature of the injuries quickly pointed to premeditated murder. There were no signs of forced entry, struggle, or foul play. It looked like a perfect crime. The second victim turned up 6 months later. A woman who lived alone was killed in similar circumstances. Again, no witnesses, no traces, no motives. The police still did not connect these cases. Nothing seemed to unite the victims. However, the similarity of the methods began to raise suspicions among experienced detectives. They realized that they might be looking at a serial killer. The year 1984 brought more murders. 2 more women fell victim in different parts of the city. One was found in her apartment, the other in an alley near the train station. The city began to panic. The newspapers exploded with loud headlines. Invisible killer in London. Police are powerless against a monster. People were afraid to go out in the evening, especially women who worked late. The police stepped up their efforts. More officers patrolled the streets, and in some areas even organized voluntary night patrols. But this only added to the chaos. The number of calls to the 999 line doubled as people reported any suspicious person. However, all the detainees had nothing to do with the crimes. The pressure from the public and the media grew. The police invited criminal psychologists to create a psychological profile of the killer. According to their findings, the perpetrator was a man aged 30 to 40, socially isolated, with deep complexes and a desire for absolute control over the victim. His methods indicated cold calculation and lack of emotional attachment. The worst part was that the motives for his actions remained a mystery. The victims had no obvious connection to each other. different ages, social status, occupations. The police assumed that he acted spontaneously, choosing his victims at random. This complicated the investigation. In 1985, what everyone feared happened. The perpetrator struck again, this time in a public park. The victim was a nurse who was returning home after a night shift. Her body was found the next morning. For the first time, the perpetrator left something like a clue, the victim's jewelry, carefully placed on the ground nearby. The police interpreted this as a deliberate gesture, but could not understand its meaning. Time passed, and murders became increasingly rare. In 1987, the last known murder took place. Then came the silence. The police were baffled. Had the perpetrator stopped for fear of being caught? Or had he died? The case gradually became unsolved, and the public began to forget about the horrific events. But everything changed almost 2 decades later. In 2005, a man was detained for petty theft in a small supermarket in a London suburb. He was arrested, and his DNA sample was added to the national database under the new rules. At the same moment, the system produced a match. The samples matched DNA found at murder scenes from the 1980s. This breakthrough was a sensation. The police immediately reviewed all old cases related to serial killings. The detained man, John Reeves, had not attracted attention before. He was middle-aged, worked in the service industry, and seemed quiet and unremarkable. But after his arrest, his behavior changed. He looked calm, even indifferent, and this only increased suspicions. Detectives launched a large-scale investigation. They found numerous items in Reeves's apartment that belonged to his victims, jewelry, photographs, even pieces of clothing. This became decisive evidence of his guilt. During interrogations, Reeves initially refused to talk, but later began to confess. His story shocked even the most experienced investigators. He said that his crimes were motivated by a desire for complete control over another person. He did not choose his victims randomly. They were women who, in his words, looked strong and independent. By killing them, he felt powerful and powerful. During the trial, Reeves was found guilty of 8 murders. However, investigators believe that he may have more victims on his conscience. Reeves was sentenced to life without parole. The case of the London rapist murderer became one of the most high-profile in the criminal history of the United Kingdom. It showed how important the development of technology is in the investigation of crimes and how even the most cold-blooded criminal eventually leaves traces behind. But the story also left many questions. Why did Reeves suddenly stop killing? Did he have any accomplices? And have all his crimes really been solved? Even years later, this case is still chilling and makes you wonder what monsters might be hiding behind ordinary faces in the crowd. Final part: consequences and unresolved issues. The case of the London rapist killer not only shocked society, but also left a large number of questions that have not been answered. John Reeves, after his arrest and conviction, became a symbol of how difficult, and sometimes impossible, it is to identify a criminal in time, even with all the necessary resources for investigation. The case once again raised questions about trust in justice, as well as the importance of using new technologies, such as DNA analysis, in the fight against crime. At the trial, Reeves only partially explained his motives. Psychologists and forensic experts believe that his actions were caused by deep psychological disturbances that had been accumulating for years. He admitted that he felt an extreme need to control others, especially the women he chose as his victims. His explanations were as cold and emotionless as his crimes. This was horrifying for those working on the case, as their efforts to uncover all the facts seemed to be insignificant in the face of the scale of his ruthless actions. But unlike other serial killers, who may have a distinctive MO or pattern, Reeves was an almost perfect criminal. He did not leave any evidence, did not show aggression in places where he could be seen. His ability to remain under the radar for so many years is a testament to his careful preparation, as well as the extent to which other details of his identity remained hidden. Reeves admitted that he only stopped because he thought he was almost invisible. However, another important question for investigators and forensic scientists is why he did not continue his activities. Did he stop because of changes in his life? Or was he frightened and exhausted when he realized that his actions could be discovered? Was this the real end of his criminal career? Technological progress played a key role in solving this case. The detection of DNA matches was made possible by improvements in forensic technology. Although the first attempts to solve these crimes in the 80s failed, new methods made it possible to link samples from the murder scenes to the detainee. This became possible only after several decades, when new DNA databases were opened, and it was further proof of the importance of investing in research and technology to aid in investigations. But for the victims' families, the London community, and the city itself, the story had a different meaning. Many asked, could these crimes have been prevented? Were there signs that could have helped the police recognize the perpetrator earlier? All of these questions remained unanswered as investigators tried to connect the events until a breakthrough was made that closed the case. But not all the questions. A huge blow was the loss of trust in the police, as the public began to doubt their ability to solve crimes without the help of new technologies. After Reeves was convicted, society could not recover from the shock for a long time. The fear that terrorized the city did not completely disappear, even after the killer was behind bars. It left a disturbing shadow over London, and even many years later, people who lived through those terrible years could not get the image of that invisible monster hiding among them out of their minds. The final part of this story touches on another important topic: the question of whether a crime committed in such a capacious form can be stopped. Technology, research, and scientific discoveries help solve crimes and punish the perpetrators, but can they completely replace human intuition, investigation, and experience? Will justice always be served? The answers to these questions remain uncertain. Leaving all his secrets in the past, Reeves became just another part of the bigger picture of the underworld, which exists on the edge of the visible and invisible. His name will remain in the memory of London, and everyone who has heard this story will not be able to forget its warning. Sometimes evil can be closer than we think, and an invisible monster can hide even among us.